The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Nevada as Catherine Reed ducked behind an overturned wagon, clutching her father's old pocket watch like a lifeline. This wasn't how she'd imagined her journey to Ely would end, stranded in the wilderness with night falling fast and bandits circling like vultures. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new life seemed to be slipping away with every passing second. Catherine had left Boston 3 weeks ago, determined to claim her late uncle's property, a small general store in Ely, Nevada. At 22, she was considered a spinster by Boston standards, but out here in the West, she hoped to forge her own path. That dream now seemed foolishly naive as she peered around the edge of the wagon to see 3 men on horseback approaching. "Come on out, lady," one of the men called, his voice carrying across the open space between them. "We just want whatever valuables you got. Maybe we'll let you live." Catherine closed her eyes, her hand trembling as she reached for the small derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt. She had exactly 2 shots, and there were 3 men. The mathematics of survival weren't in her favor. A sharp whistle cut through the air, followed by the thundering of hooves. Catherine risked another glance and saw a cloud of dust approaching rapidly from the east. The bandits turned, clearly startled by this new development. A lone rider appeared, moving with astonishing speed. His face was obscured by a bandana, but even from a distance, Catherine could see the determination in his posture as he fired 2 warning shots into the air. The bandits hesitated, seemingly weighing their options before turning their horses and galloping away. The stranger slowed his horse to a trot as he approached Catherine's hiding place. He pulled down the bandana, revealing a sun-weathered face with piercing blue eyes. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, dismounting with fluid grace that belied his tall frame. "No," Catherine managed, her voice shakier than she would have liked. "They didn't get the chance, thanks to you," he nodded, scanning the horizon to ensure the bandits were truly gone. "Name's Jake Xavier. Most folks just call me Jax." He extended a gloved hand to help her up. "Catherine Reed," she replied, accepting his assistance. "I was on my way to Ely when my driver abandoned me, said there were rumors of Apache raids in the area." Jake Xavier's expression darkened. "Your driver was a fool and a coward. The Apache haven't bothered settlers in these parts for months." He glanced at the damaged wagon. "But you're still in a fix. Night's coming and we're a good day's ride from Ely." Catherine felt her stomach sink. "What do you suggest?" "There's an old line shack about an hour's ride from here. Not much, but it's shelter. We can head to Ely at first light." Catherine hesitated, unsure whether to trust this stranger, but as the sun dipped lower on the horizon, she realized she had little choice. "Very well, Mr. Xavier." "Just Jax," he corrected, helping her gather her most important belongings before securing them to his horse. "The rest will have to wait. With luck, it'll still be here tomorrow." As they rode double on his horse, Catherine found herself acutely aware of his proximity. His arm occasionally brushed against hers as he handled the reins, and the scent of leather, horses, and something uniquely his own surrounded her. Despite her predicament, she couldn't help but notice how capable his hands seemed, how confident his posture. The lined shack proved to be a humble one-room structure with a stone fireplace, a small table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot. Jake Jax, she reminded herself, immediately set about gathering wood for a fire while Catherine took inventory of the supplies left in the shack. "There's some coffee and beans," she called out, examining the dusty shelves. "And what looks like jerky, though I wouldn't trust it." "Coffee's probably fine," he replied, returning with an armload of wood. "Been dry around these parts." As darkness fell completely, the small shack grew cozy with the warmth of the fire. Catherine found a half-empty bottle of whiskey in one of the cupboards, and feeling the need for something to calm her nerves, poured a small amount into a tin cup. "To unexpected rescues," she murmured, taking a small sip and wincing at the burn. She wasn't accustomed to strong spirits, having only occasionally indulged in sherry back in Boston. Jax watched her for a moment, an unreadable expression on his face. Then, without warning, he reached over and gently took the cup from her hand, pouring its contents into the fire, which flared briefly with blue flames. "Let's try coffee instead," he suggested, his voice soft but firm. "You'll need your wits about you tomorrow. Trail to Ely can be tricky." Catherine felt a flash of indignation. Who was he to decide what she should drink? But it quickly faded. He was right, of course, and there was something in the way he said it, not condescending but concerned, that made her acquiesce. "You're probably right," she admitted, watching as he set a pot of coffee to brew over the fire. "I'm not much of a drinker anyway." Jack smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "Never would have guessed," he said with a touch of humor. "You handled that whiskey like it was medicine." Catherine laughed despite herself. "That obvious? Only to someone who's seen their fair share of first-time drinkers." He stirred the coffee grounds into the water. "What brings a Boston lady all the way to Ely, Nevada?" "I'm guessing it wasn't the scenery." Catherine explained about her uncle's store and her decision to take over the business rather than sell it sight unseen. "My parents died when I was 16, she added. "I've been living with my aunt in Boston since then, but it never quite felt like home," Jax finished for her. She looked at him, surprised by his perception. "Exactly. How did you know?" He shrugged, pouring the now ready coffee into 2 tin cups. "Recognized the look. Had it myself once upon a time." As they sipped their coffee, Catherine found Jax surprisingly easy to talk to. He told her he'd been a cavalry scout, then a cattle driver, and now occasionally worked as a guide and tracker. He knew the territory between California and Colorado like the back of his hand, he claimed, and had been heading to Ely himself when he heard the gunshot. "Lucky coincidence," Catherine remarked. "Don't believe much in coincidence," he replied, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Things happen for reasons we don't always understand right away." They talked late into the night, the coffee long gone, replaced by companionable conversation. Catherine learned that Jax had lost his family in a Comanche raid when he was just 12, had been taken in by a cavalry officer, and had spent most of his adult life wandering the West. There was a loneliness to him that resonated with something inside Catherine, a sense of being unmoored, of searching for something just out of reach. When Catherine finally dozed off in the cot, Jack spread his bedroll near the fire. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was the sight of his profile against the firelight, strong and watchful. The morning brought clarity and a touch of awkwardness as Catherine realized how much she had revealed to a virtual stranger. Jax, however, acted as though nothing unusual had occurred. He was all business as they prepared to leave, checking his horse and her remaining luggage with efficient movements. "We should reach Ely by sundown if we push hard," he informed her as they set out. The journey proved longer than expected. A storm had washed out part of the trail, forcing them to take a longer route. They stopped only briefly to rest the horse and eat some of the provisions Jax had packed. "Tell me about this store of yours," he said as they rode, Catherine once again seated behind him. "I'm not entirely sure what condition it's in," she admitted. "My Uncle William lived above the store." The lawyer who handled his estate said it was still operational when he passed, but that was 6 months ago. "William Reed," Jax mused. "I knew him, good man, fair in his dealings, which isn't always the case out here." Catherine felt a surge of pride and relief. "You knew my uncle." "Ely's not a big place, and your uncle was known for extending credit to folks down on their luck, saved more than a few families during hard winters." This was news to Catherine, who had only vague childhood memories of her father's brother. "I hope I can live up to his reputation." "It won't be easy," Jax warned. "Woman running a business alone in these parts, you'll face challenges." Catherine stiffened slightly. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Xavier." "Never suggested you were," he replied, glancing back at her, "just stating facts. Might be wise to consider taking on a partner, at least until you get established. Are you offering?" The words slipped out before Catherine could stop them, and she immediately regretted the presumptuous question. Jax didn't answer immediately, and Catherine couldn't see his expression from her position. Finally, he said, "Let's get you safely to Ely first, then you can decide what kind of help you need." The sun was indeed setting when they crested a hill and saw Ely spread out before them in the valley below. It was smaller than Catherine had imagined a main street with perhaps 20 buildings, a church steeple rising at one end, and scattered houses and farms surrounding it. Yet there was something immediately appealing about its nestled position among the hills. "Welcome to your new home," Jack said softly. Reed's General Store stood in the middle of the main street, its weathered sign still visible in the fading light. The windows were dusty but intact, and the structure itself appeared sound. Jax helped Catherine dismount in front of the store, then tied his horse to the hitching post. "I still have the key," Catherine said, reaching into her reticule. The brass key felt heavy in her palm, a tangible link to her unknown future. The store smelled of dust and neglect when they entered, but Catherine could immediately see its potential. Shelves lined the walls, some still stocked with canned goods and dry goods. A large counter ran along the back, with a door behind it presumably leading to stairs to the living quarters above. "It's better than I expected," she admitted, running a hand along the counter's surface. "It just needs a good cleaning and restocking." Jax nodded, his eyes taking in every detail of the space. "Town's grown since I was here last. Good sign for business." He paused, then added, "You should check the living quarters before full dark." The apartment above the store was small but practical, a sitting room with a fireplace, a tiny kitchen, a bedroom, and a small second room that might serve as a study or guest room. Everything was covered in a layer of dust, but the furniture appeared solid and well made. "I can stay at the hotel tonight," Jax offered, standing awkwardly in the sitting room doorway. "Come back tomorrow to help you get settled." Catherine turned to him, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. "You've done so much already, I don't know how to thank you." "No need," he said with a small smile. "Like I said, I knew your uncle. Consider it a debt repaid." "At least let me buy you dinner," Catherine insisted. "There must be somewhere in town we can get a meal." Jax hesitated, then nodded. "Maggie's place down the street serves decent food." "Nothing fancy, but it's hot and filling." Maggie's turned out to be a small restaurant attached to the hotel. The proprietress, a robust woman in her 50s with graying red hair, greeted Jax like an old friend and eyed Catherine with undisguised curiosity. "So you're Bill Reed's niece," she said, bringing them each a plate of beef stew and fresh bread. "He spoke of you often, said you had your mother's eyes and your father's stubborn streak." Catherine smiled, touched that her uncle had remembered her. "Did you know him well?" "Everyone knew Bill," Maggie replied. "He was the heart of this town for 20 years. We all felt it when he passed." Throughout the meal, various townspeople stopped by their table to introduce themselves to Catherine. The sheriff, a tall man named Donovan with a silver-streaked beard, welcomed her formally to Ely. The banker, Mr. Phillips, offered his assistance with any financial matters. Two women who ran the dress shop invited her to tea once she was settled. Catherine felt overwhelmed by the attention but warmed by the community's apparent acceptance. She glanced at Jax, who watched the proceedings with quiet amusement. "Is it always like this?" she whispered when there was a momentary lull. "New faces are rare enough to cause a stir," he explained. "Especially pretty ones with connections to a beloved local figure." Catherine felt herself blush at the casual compliment. "And what about you? Do you plan to stay in Ely?" Jax's expression grew thoughtful. "Never stayed anywhere too long," he admitted. "But I've been thinking lately that it might be time to put down some roots." Before Catherine could respond, Maggie returned with apple pie for dessert. "On the house," she insisted. "Welcome to Ely, Miss Reed." Later, as they walked back to the store in the gathering darkness, Catherine found herself reluctant for the evening to end. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" she asked as they reached her door. Jax looked down at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light from the street's few lanterns. "Better not," he said finally. "Town's small and people talk. Wouldn't want to damage your reputation your first night here." Catherine hadn't considered how their association might be perceived. In Boston, being alone with a man would indeed cause scandal, but she'd assumed the West had different standards. "I see," she said, unable to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Well then, good night, Mr. Xavier, and thank you again." "Jax," he reminded her with a slight smile. And I'll be by in the morning to help you start cleaning up. That is, if you want the help. I'd appreciate it very much, Catherine replied, finding herself smiling back. Sleep well, Catherine, he said, tipping his hat before turning toward the hotel. Catherine watched him walk away, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. She barely knew this man, yet she felt connected to him in a way she couldn't explain. Shaking her head at her own foolishness, she unlocked the store door and went inside to begin her new life. The next morning brought sunshine and clarity. Catherine awoke early, having slept surprisingly well on her uncle's bed despite the layer of dust on everything. She'd managed to clean enough of the kitchen the night before to make it functional and now stood at the small stove, brewing coffee with supplies she'd found in the store below. A knock at the door downstairs pulled her from her thoughts. She hurried down to find Jack standing outside, hat in hand with a basket over his arm. "Brought breakfast," he said, holding up the basket. "Maggie's biscuits, best in the territory." Catherine's stomach rumbled in response, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since dinner the previous night. "Come in," she invited, suddenly conscious of her appearance. She'd done her best with cold water and a comb, but she knew she must look disheveled. If Jax noticed, he gave no indication. He followed her upstairs to the kitchen, where she poured coffee into the only 2 clean cups she'd found. "I've been thinking," she said as they ate the still warm biscuits with honey, "about what you said regarding a partner for the business." Jax looked up, his expression guarded. "And I don't know the first thing about running a general store in a mining town," she admitted. "I could use someone with knowledge of the area, the people, their needs." "I'm not much of a shopkeeper," Jax said, his tone careful. "No, but you know this territory better than most, you said so yourself, and I suspect you know what miners and ranchers need, what they're willing to pay for." Catherine took a deep breath. "I'm proposing a business arrangement, Mr. Xavier, a partnership, 3 months to start. You help me get established, teach me what I need to know, and in return you receive 20% of the profits." Jack studied her for a long moment. "That's generous." "It's practical," Catherine countered. "I need help and you need—" "Well, you mentioned putting down roots." A slow smile spread across his face. "I did at that." He extended his hand across the table. "Partners, then, for 3 months." Catherine shook his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm and the strength in his grip. Partners. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Catherine and Jax cleaned the store from top to bottom, took inventory of the remaining stock, and made lists of supplies to order. Catherine wrote to the lawyer in Boston, instructing him to transfer the remainder of her savings to the bank in Ely. Jax introduced her to reliable suppliers and taught her the basics of negotiating prices. The store reopened on a crisp October morning with a modest celebration. Catherine had baked cookies, and Maggie contributed a barrel of cider. The townspeople came to browse, buy, and mostly to satisfy their curiosity about the new proprietress of Reed's General Store. By the end of the day, Catherine was exhausted but exhilarated. They'd made more in sales than she'd anticipated, and she'd begun to learn the names and faces of her new neighbors. "We did well," Jax said as he helped her close up for the evening. He'd taken to sleeping in the small back room of the store, insisting it was to provide security for the merchandise but also, Catherine suspected, to protect her reputation. "We did," she agreed, counting the day's receipts. "Better than I expected." As autumn progressed into winter, the store flourished under their joint management. Jack seemed to have a natural instinct for what items would sell well, while Catherine's organizational skills and head for numbers kept them profitable. They established a rhythm, working side by side during the day and often sharing meals in the evening, talking late into the night about everything from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. Catherine found herself growing increasingly aware of Jax as more than just a business partner. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle way he handled children who came into the store, the respect he showed to everyone regardless of their station. And sometimes, she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. The first snow came in early December, blanketing Ely in white. Catherine stood at the store window, watching the flakes swirl in the wind when Jax came to stand beside her. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she murmured. "Yes," he said, but when she glanced up, he wasn't looking at the snow. He was looking at her. Catherine felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "Jax." The bell over the door jingled, breaking the moment as Sheriff Donovan stomped in, shaking snow from his coat. "Bitter cold out there," he announced. "Miss Reed, Mr. Xavier." "What can we do for you, Sheriff?" Jax asked, his voice perfectly normal, as if nothing had almost happened between them. "Just checking in. Storm's getting worse. Might want to close up early, get your supplies in order. Could be snowed in for a couple of days." After the sheriff left, they decided to heed his advice. Jax went to secure extra firewood while Catherine inventoried their food supplies. By the time he returned, the wind was howling around the building, and darkness had fallen despite the early hour. "It's bad out there," he reported, stamping snow from his boots. "Good thing we're well stocked." They settled in for the evening, with Jax building a fire in the sitting room fireplace while Catherine prepared a simple dinner of bean soup and cornbread. As they ate by firelight, the storm raged outside, rattling the windows with its fury. "3 months are almost up," Catherine said suddenly. Setting down her spoon, Jax looked at her across the small table. "I know. Our arrangement." "Catherine," he interrupted, his voice gentle, "I'm not going anywhere, not unless you want me to." She met his gaze, seeing the question in his eyes. "I don't," she admitted softly. "Good," he said simply. "Because I've been thinking about building something more permanent than our current arrangement." Catherine's heart skipped a beat. "What did you have in mind?" Jax reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I think you know." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across his face. Outside, the storm continued, but within the warm room, a different kind of electricity charged the air. "I do," Catherine whispered, squeezing his hand, "but I want to hear you say it." Jax's smile was slow and sure. "I want to court you properly, Catherine Reed. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "I'd like that very much, Jake Xavier." He leaned across the table then, and their lips met in a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened into something more certain. When they finally drew apart, both were breathing faster, and Catherine could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "I've wanted to do that since the night we met," Jax confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Why did you wait so long?" Catherine asked, still holding his hand tightly. "Because some things are worth waiting for," he replied, "and because I wanted you to be sure." "I'm not exactly the kind of man your family back east would approve of," Catherine laughed softly. "My family back east has no say in my happiness, and you make me very happy, Jax." The blizzard lasted 3 days, during which time Catherine and Jax remained snowbound in the store. Those days became precious memories for Catherine, hours spent talking by the fire, teaching Jax to play chess with her uncle's old set, cooking together in the tiny kitchen, and sharing increasingly passionate kisses that left them both yearning for more. When the storm finally broke and they dug their way out, Catherine half expected things to change between them. But Jax was true to his word about courting her properly. He continued to sleep in the store's back room rather than upstairs, and in public, he maintained a respectful distance. But everyone in Ely could see the way they looked at each other, and soon it was common knowledge that Miss Reed and Mr. Xavier were walking out together. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing new life to the hills around Ely. The store continued to prosper, with Catherine and Jax expanding their inventory to include seeds, farming tools, and even a small selection of books that Catherine ordered from San Francisco. On a particularly beautiful April evening, Jax suggested they take a ride out to see a special place he'd discovered. They rode double on his horse, Catherine's arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek resting against his back as they climbed into the hills above town. The spot Jax had chosen was a small meadow filled with wildflowers, with a view of Ely below and the mountains beyond. He spread a blanket under a lone pine tree, and they shared the picnic dinner Catherine had packed. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Jax took her hand and led her to the edge of the meadow. I found this place last autumn, he told her, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. Came up here to think about you, about us, about the future. Catherine's heart began to race as he turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I've never had a real home, Catherine, not since I was a boy, but I've found one with you. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. I'm not a wealthy man, and I can't offer you the kind of life you might have had in Boston, but I can promise to love you, protect you, and work by your side for as long as I live. He opened the box to reveal a ring with a small but perfect diamond. Catherine Reed, will you marry me? Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, she managed through her emotion. Yes, I will marry you, Xavier. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace, kissing her with all the passion they'd been restraining for months. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, Catherine laughed with pure joy. I never imagined when I came west that I would find not just a home, but the love of my life. Remember what I said about coincidences, Jax reminded her with a smile. I was meant to find you that day. We were meant to find each other. They married in Ely's small church on the first day of summer, 1877. The entire town turned out for the ceremony and the celebration that followed. Maggie outdid herself with a feast, and the local miners' band provided music for dancing late into the night. Catherine wore a dress of pale blue silk that she'd ordered from San Francisco, with flowers in her hair instead of a veil. Jax, unrecognizable to some in his new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her throughout the ceremony. Mrs. Xavier, he whispered as they shared their first dance as husband and wife, has a nice ring to it. It does, she agreed, her eyes shining with happiness. Though I think we should keep the store name as Reed's. My uncle worked hard to build that reputation. Reed's it is, Jax agreed easily. As long as everyone knows you're mine now. The newlyweds moved into the apartment above the store, which they had renovated and expanded over the spring. Jax built a larger bedroom and added a proper bathroom with a copper tub, a luxury that Catherine particularly appreciated. Their first year of marriage brought changes to Ely as well. The railroad finally extended a spur line to the town, bringing more settlers and more business. Reed's general store thrived, and Catherine and Jax hired 2 assistants to help with the increased traffic. In the spring of 1878, Catherine discovered she was expecting their first child. Jax's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped, for pure joy mixed with protective concern that she found both touching and amusing. You need to rest more, he insisted, trying to take a heavy box from her hands in the store. I'm pregnant, not ill, Catherine retorted, but she allowed him to take the box anyway. His obvious love for her and their unborn child melted any irritation she might have felt at his hovering. Their son, William Jacob Xavier, was born on a stormy November night in 1878. Catherine's labor was long and difficult, with the town's midwife and doctor both in attendance. Jax paced outside the bedroom door, driven nearly mad with worry by Catherine's cries of pain. When the doctor finally emerged to tell him he had a healthy son and that Catherine would recover, Jax wept unashamedly, overcome with relief and joy. He's perfect, Catherine whispered when Jax was finally allowed to see them. She cradled their tiny son, whose shock of dark hair mirrored his father's. Look what we made, Jax. Jax sat carefully on the edge of the bed, one arm around Catherine's shoulders and one hand gently touching his son's cheek. He's incredible, he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. Just like his mother. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. The store continued to prosper, and Catherine and Jax became respected business leaders in the growing community. They added a second child to their family, a daughter, Elizabeth Rose, born in 1881, and Jax built a proper house on the outskirts of town with room for their growing family to spread out. There were difficult times as well. A fire in 1880 destroyed several buildings on Main Street, though Reed's was spared. A drought in 1882 brought hardship to the ranchers and farmers in the area, and Catherine and Jax extended credit to many families, just as her uncle had done years before. Through it all, their partnership in business and in life remained strong. They complemented each other perfectly, with Catherine's practicality balancing Jax's occasional impulsiveness, and his courage bolstering her during times of doubt. In 1883, Catherine received a letter from her aunt in Boston, expressing a desire to visit and meet the family Catherine had built in the West. The older woman arrived that summer, clearly expecting to find her niece living in primitive conditions. Instead, she was astonished by the thriving business, the comfortable home, and most of all, by the obvious love between Catherine and her husband. "I worried when you left," her aunt admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Jax play with the children in the yard. "I thought you were running away from something, but you were running toward something better, weren't you?" Catherine smiled, watching as her husband scooped up their giggling daughter while their son clamored for a turn. "I was," she agreed, though I didn't know it at the time. By 1886, Ely had grown into a proper small city, with a bank, a newspaper, several churches, and a school where young William Xavier was now a student. Reed's General Store had expanded to include a second location on the other side of town, managed by Catherine's trusted assistant, while she and Jax continued to run the original store. On the 10th anniversary of Catherine's arrival in Ely, they closed the store early and took the children for a picnic in the same meadow where Jax had proposed. As the children played among the wildflowers, Catherine and Jax sat close together on the blanket, his arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Coming west, taking on the store, marrying a rough cowboy instead of some Boston gentleman?" Catherine turned to face him, surprised by the question. At 32, she was in her prime, confident, capable, and still deeply in love with her husband. Jax, nearing 40, had a few strands of silver in his dark hair, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but to Catherine, he was as handsome as the day they'd met. "Not for a single moment," she assured him, reaching up to touch his face. "You and our children are the greatest blessings of my life. This place, this life we've built together. It's beyond anything I could have imagined. Even when I drive you crazy with my stubborn ways," he teased, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Especially then," she laughed. "Because that's when I'm reminded of how passionate you are about everything, our business, our family, our life together." He pulled her closer, kissing her properly despite the presence of their children nearby. "I love you, Catherine Xavier," he murmured against her lips. "More today than yesterday, and not as much as tomorrow." As the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky in the same golden hues she remembered from their engagement day, Catherine gazed at her family with a heart full of gratitude. William was throwing a stick for the dog they'd acquired last winter, while Elizabeth was busy making a crown of wildflowers, her small face serious with concentration. "We should head back soon," Jax said, following her gaze to their children. "It'll be dark before long." Catherine nodded but made no move to get up. "Just a few more minutes," she requested. "I want to remember this moment." Jax squeezed her shoulder in understanding. "We have many more moments to come," he promised. "A lifetime of them." That night, after the children were asleep, Catherine and Jax sat together by the fire in their home, much as they had that first night in the line shack a decade earlier. She had a glass of wine. She'd developed a taste for it over the years, though she still preferred coffee most evenings, and Jax was smoking his pipe, a habit he indulged in only occasionally. "I've been thinking," he said, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "about expanding again. Not the store this time, but our other interests." Catherine raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Over the years, they had diversified their business holdings, investing in a small silver mine and purchasing several rental properties in town. "What did you have in mind?" "Land," Jax replied. "The Morrison Ranch is for sale. Old man Morrison is moving to California to live with his daughter. It's good grazing land with a decent water source." "You want to raise cattle?" Catherine asked, surprised. Jax had occasionally mentioned his time as a cattle driver, but he'd never expressed interest in ranching himself. "Not exactly," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "I was thinking horses, quality stock. There's always a market for good horses, especially with the army." Catherine considered the idea, mentally reviewing their finances. The store was doing well, as were their other investments. They could afford to take on something new. "You'd need help," she pointed out. "Running the store and a horse ranch would be too much, even for you." "I've thought of that," Jax admitted. "William is getting old enough to take more responsibility at the store after school, and I've talked to Thomas Johnson about coming on as foreman if we go ahead with this. He knows horses better than anyone in the county." Catherine smiled, recognizing the passion in her husband's voice. It was the same passion he brought to everything he cared about. "You've given this a lot of thought." "I have," he acknowledged, "but I wouldn't consider it without your full support. We're partners in everything, Catherine." "Always have been." The reminder of their partnership, which had grown from a business arrangement to encompass every aspect of their lives, warmed Catherine's heart. "Let's look at the numbers together tomorrow," she suggested. "If it makes sense financially, then I say we do it." Jack set aside his pipe and moved to kneel in front of her chair, taking both her hands in his. "Have I told you lately how remarkable you are?" he asked, his eyes soft with love. "Most women would balk at the idea of their husband taking on something like this." "I'm not most women," Catherine reminded him with a smile. "And you're not most husbands. We've never followed the conventional path, Jax. Why start now?" He laughed and rose to pull her to her feet and into his arms. "Why indeed?" he murmured before kissing her with the same passion that had always existed between them, undiminished by time or familiarity. The Xavier horse ranch became a reality the following spring. The Morrison property, situated about 5 miles outside of Ely, included a sturdy main house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Jax and Catherine decided to maintain their home in town, using the ranch house for the foreman's family and occasional overnight stays. As predicted, young William showed a keen interest in both the store and the ranch, spending weekdays helping after school at Reed's and weekends learning horsemanship from his father. Elizabeth, now 6, preferred the ranch outright, developing a special affinity for a gentle mare named Daisy that Jax designated as her own. In 1888, their family expanded again with the birth of twins Robert James and Richard Thomas, arriving earlier than expected but healthy, despite their small size. Catherine, now 34, found managing the twins, the 2 older children, the store, and the ranch accounts to be her greatest challenge yet. But with Jax's unwavering support and the help of a young woman from town who came in daily to assist with the children and household, she adapted to their busier life. The twins' first birthday celebration in January 1889 coincided with the worst winter storm anyone in Ely could remember. Snowdrifts reached second-story windows, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze in buckets inside homes. Jax had gone to the ranch 2 days before the storm hit to help secure the horses and hadn't been able to return. Catherine tried to hide her worry from the children, assuring them that their father was safe at the ranch with Mr. Johnson and the other hands. But as the 3rd day of the storm arrived with no sign of abating, her concern deepened. "Mama, when is Papa coming home?" William asked as they huddled around the fire, the twins napping nearby and Elizabeth working on her sampler. "As soon as the storm breaks," Catherine assured him, praying she was right. "He's safe at the ranch. You know how sturdy that house and barn are." William nodded, but his young face remained troubled. At 11, he understood the dangers of a Nevada winter better than his siblings. On the morning of the 4th day, Catherine awoke to silence. The howling wind had finally stopped. She rushed to the window to find the world transformed into a blindingly white landscape, the sun reflecting off the snow with diamond brilliance. "William, stay with your brothers and sister," she instructed after breakfast, pulling on her warmest clothes. "I'm going to check on the store and see if there's any news from the ranch." The main street had been partially cleared by townspeople eager to assess damage and check on neighbors. Catherine made her way carefully to the store, relieved to find it intact except for a broken window on the 2nd floor. She had just finished boarding up the window with help from their clerk when a shout went up from the end of the street. Catherine looked up to see several riders approaching, bundled so heavily they were almost unrecognizable. But Catherine would know that posture anywhere, even buried under layers of coats and scarves. "Jax," she breathed, hurrying out into the street. He dismounted stiffly, clearly exhausted, but his eyes lit up when he saw her running toward him. They met in the middle of the snow-packed street, Jax catching her up in a fierce embrace despite his fatigue. "The children?" he asked immediately. "Safe at home," she assured him, scanning his face for signs of frostbite or injury. "All of them, but I was so worried about you. Had to check on the herd," he explained as they walked together toward their home. "We lost a few, but most are safe. Johnson and the boys are bringing them closer to the barn until this passes." Their reunion with the children was joyous, with William trying to maintain dignity while clearly relieved, Elizabeth throwing herself into her father's arms, and the twins toddling over to tug at his snow-dampened pants legs. Later, after the children were in bed and Jax had thawed out with a hot bath and a hearty meal, he and Catherine sat close together by the fire, his arm around her shoulders. "I was afraid you might try to reach the ranch if I didn't make it back," he admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Promise me you'd never risk yourself like that, Catherine. The children need you." "They need both of us," she countered, turning to look up at him. "But I promise, as long as you promise to never scare me like that again." He smiled, the firelight highlighting the silver that now liberally streaked his dark hair. "Deal," he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. The 1890s brought new changes to Ely and to the Xavier family. The town continued to grow, with electric lights installed on Main Street in 1892 and telephone service arriving in 1895. Reed's General Store expanded once again, adding a second floor with offices that Catherine rented to the town doctor and a lawyer. The children grew rapidly. William, serious and responsible like his mother but with Jax's love of the outdoors, began taking on more responsibility at both the store and the ranch. Elizabeth, now a teenager with her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes, showed a remarkable talent for numbers and helped Catherine with the bookkeeping for both businesses. The twins, approaching their 10th birthday, were as different as brothers could be while still looking nearly identical. Robert was quiet and thoughtful, often found with his nose in a book, while Richard was all energy and mischief, preferring to be outside with the horses or exploring the hills around Ely. In 1896, Catherine and Jax celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a surprise party organized by their children and the townspeople whose lives they had touched over the years. The town hall was decorated with flowers and ribbons, and nearly everyone in Ely attended to honor the couple who had become such an integral part of the community. To Jake and Catherine Xavier, Sheriff Donovan, now gray-haired but still imposing, proposed a toast. "Who came to us as strangers and became the heart of Ely. May your next 20 years bring you as much joy as you've brought to us." Cheers and applause filled the room as Jax pulled Catherine close for a kiss, heedless of the audience. After all these years, he still looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in his world. 20 years, Catherine marveled later that night as they walked home under a canopy of stars. "Sometimes it seems like just yesterday that you poured out my whiskey and offered me coffee instead." Jax laughed, the sound rich and warm in the quiet street. "Best decision I ever made," he declared. "Though I seem to recall you developed a taste for wine eventually." "Only on special occasions," she reminded him. "Coffee is still my preference, especially when shared with you." As they reached their home, the same house Jax had built for them when William was small, though they had expanded it over the years to accommodate their growing family, Catherine paused on the porch, looking up at the starry sky. "What are you thinking?" Jax asked, coming to stand beside her. "About how fortunate I've been," she replied, leaning against him as his arm slipped around her waist. "To have found you, to have our children, to build this life together. I can't imagine any different path." "Nor can I," he agreed, his voice husky with emotion. "You gave me a home, Catherine. A purpose, a family, everything I never knew I needed until I found you." She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, still handsome despite the lines of age, still dear beyond measure. And you gave me the courage to find my own strength to build a life on my own terms. We truly are partners in every way. Always, he promised, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness that had marked their very first kiss on that snowy night so long ago. The turn of the century brought more changes, some welcome and some bittersweet. William, now 23, married his childhood sweetheart, Sarah Johnson, daughter of their ranch foreman, in a ceremony that filled the Ely church to capacity. The young couple chose to live at the ranch, with William taking over more of the day-to-day management while Jax focused on breeding and training. Elizabeth, at 20, surprised her parents by announcing her intention to attend college in California, a bold move for a young woman of her time, but one that Catherine and Jax supported wholeheartedly. "She has your determination," Jax told Catherine as they saw Elizabeth off at the train station, "and your brains, she'll go far." The twins, now young men of 16, had settled into their disparate interests. Robert worked alongside his mother at the store, showing a keen mind for business, while Richard assisted his father and brother at the ranch, displaying a natural affinity with even the most difficult horses. In 1901, Catherine and Jax became grandparents for the first time when William and Sarah welcomed a daughter, whom they named Catherine Rose after both grandmothers. Holding her tiny namesake, Catherine felt a surge of emotion that took her by surprise. "She's perfect," she whispered to Jax, who stood beside her with his hand on her shoulder, gazing down at their granddaughter with wonder in his eyes. "Just like her grandmother," he replied softly. At 63, Jax moved a bit more slowly than in his youth, but his eyes still held the same vitality and love when he looked at Catherine. The years that followed brought more grandchildren, 2 more for William and Sarah, and eventually 3 for Elizabeth, who returned from college with a teaching degree and a husband who practiced law. The twins remained bachelors into their 20s, with Robert eventually taking over full management of Reed's while Richard expanded the horse breeding operation with new bloodlines from Kentucky. In 1906, Catherine and Jax made a momentous decision. With their children all established in their own lives and businesses, they decided to sell their house in town and move permanently to the ranch, to a new smaller house that Jax built with help from his sons and grandson. "Are you sure about this?" Jax asked Catherine as they sat on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. "You've been a town woman for 30 years, Catherine smiled, taking his hand in hers. At 52, she was still beautiful, her auburn hair now streaked with silver, her green eyes as bright and intelligent as ever. "I'm sure," she assured him. "This place has always been special to you, and now it's time for us to enjoy it together. Besides, we're only a short ride from town. We can visit whenever we want." Jax brought her hand to his lips, his eyes warm with love. "Have I told you today how much I love you, Mrs. Xavier?" "Yes," she laughed, "but I never tire of hearing it." Life on the ranch suited them. Catherine maintained a small garden, corresponded regularly with Elizabeth in California, and rode with Jax each morning to check on the horses. They hosted Sunday dinners for the entire extended family whenever possible, their table often surrounded by children and grandchildren, with laughter and conversation flowing freely. In the summer of 1916, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a grand party at the ranch. Ely had grown into a proper city by then, with automobiles occasionally seen on the streets alongside horses and wagons. But Xavier Horse Ranch remained a place of tradition and quality, known throughout the West for its exceptional stock. The celebration brought together 4 generations of Xaviers, along with friends from town who had known Catherine and Jax since their early days together. Even Catherine's cousin from Boston made the journey to witness the milestone. As evening fell and lanterns were lit around the ranch yard, William called for everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, raising his glass. "To my parents who taught us all what it means to be partners in life." Their love story began with a chance meeting on a dangerous trail and has continued through 40 years of building, growing, and loving. May we all be so blessed. Glasses were raised amid calls of hear, hear. Catherine, seated beside Jax at the head table, felt tears spring to her eyes as she looked at the family they had created together, their 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and even 1 great-grandchild toddling about the yard. Jax leaned close, his voice for her ears alone. "Remember that night by the fire?" he asked. "When I poured out your whiskey and suggested coffee instead," Catherine smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "I remember thinking you were terribly presumptuous," she admitted, "but also kind. And handsome, though I tried not to notice." Jax chuckled, the sound as warm and familiar as his hand holding hers under the table. "I knew that night that you were special. I just had no idea how completely you would change my life." "We changed each other's lives," Catherine corrected gently. "That's what true partnership means." Later, after the guests had departed and the family had helped clean up, Catherine and Jax found themselves alone on the porch of the small house they now called home. The night was warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and pine from the surrounding hills. 40 years, Jax mused, his arm around Catherine's shoulders as they sat side by side on the porch swing he had built for her 60th birthday. "If someone had told me back when I was riding solo through these hills that I'd find a woman who would stand beside me for 40 years, I'd have called them crazy. And if someone had told me when I left Boston that I'd fall in love with a cowboy and build a life in Nevada, I'd have said the same," Catherine replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Yet here we are." Jax pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his voice thoughtful. "Any regrets? Things you wish we'd done differently?" Catherine considered the question seriously. Their life together hadn't been without challenges. They'd weathered storms, both literal and figurative, faced financial hardships during the banking panic of 1893, mourned the loss of friends and family members. But through it all, they had faced every challenge together, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. "Not a single one," she answered honestly. "Every step, every decision led us to this moment, this life. I wouldn't change a thing." Jax's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Nor would I," he agreed. "Though sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I hadn't come along when those bandits were troubling you." Catherine smiled, remembering her fear that day and the overwhelming relief when Jax had appeared like an avenging angel. "I'd like to think we'd have found each other anyway," she said. "That we were meant to be, regardless of the circumstances." "I believe that," Jax said softly. "I believe some souls are destined to find each other no matter what." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, listening to the night sounds of the ranch horses moving in the paddock, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "Coffee," Catherine suggested eventually, remembering the ritual they had established decades ago. "I'll make it," Jax offered, rising and extending his hand to help her up. Inside their cozy home, surrounded by mementos of their life together, photographs of children and grandchildren, souvenirs from trips they had taken to San Francisco and even once to New York, books they had read aloud to each other on winter evenings, Catherine watched as Jax prepared their coffee with the same care he had shown that very first night. When he handed her a steaming cup, their fingers brushed and the familiar spark of connection passed between them. Some things, Catherine reflected, never changed, no matter how many years passed. "To 40 more years," Jax suggested, raising his cup in a toast. Catherine laughed, the sound as youthful as it had been when they first met. "That would make us well over 100, she pointed out. "But yes, to however many more years were granted together, every single one a blessing." They clinked their cups together, these two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life rich with love, family, and purpose. Outside, the stars shone over Ely and the Xavier ranch, witnesses to a love story that had begun with a chance encounter, a poured-out glass, and a simple invitation to try coffee instead.